It's certainly not unusual for a song to be written using exclusively major chords. There are literally hundreds of songs that don't use anything but major chords. But the same can't be said for minor chords. It's actually very unusual to find a song that only uses minor chords. I've only been able to find a handful of examples. 505 by the Arctic Monkeys is an example of a song that only uses minor chords, switching between E minor and D minor for the entire song.
I'm going back to 505 if it's a 7 hour.
Call Out My Name by The Weeknd is similar, simply switching between A flat minor and E flat minor for the entire song. Get the Party Started by Pink stays on just one chord for the whole song, B minor. As you can see, this is quickly turning into a video about songs that only use one or two chords. It seems that any song that only uses minor chords has to keep harmonic movement to an absolute minimum, and therefore you only get one or two chords in the entire song. Run Through the Jungle by Creedence Clearwater Revival sticks on D minor for the entire tune. Political World by Bob Dylan stays on F sharp minor for the whole song.
We live in a political world. Love don't have any place.
If we expand our search to include minor 7 chords, then we do get a few more examples. Sing by Ed Sheeran vamps between A flat minor and D flat minor 7 for the entire song. Moves Like Jagger by Maroon 5 is similar, moving from B minor 7 to E minor 7 throughout. Falling by Alicia Keys is based entirely on a move from E minor to B minor 7. Family Affair by Mary J. Blige is a similar example, moving from C sharp minor to G sharp minor 7 for the entire tune. Chain of Fools by Aretha Franklin almost stays on C minor 7 for the entire tune, but we actually get a brief C7 at the beginning. Ain't No Sunshine by Bill Withers is largely built from minor chords, but it does feature these brief G major chords. And although brief, these major chords are quite important to the song because they're cadencing us back to A minor.
Ain't no sunshine which is gone. This I'll say ain't no more. Anytime she goes away. And I know.
So why is it difficult to write a song just using minor chords? In most songs, the chord progression utilises what is called functional harmony. This is the idea that chords in a progression have functions. Let's look at a very typical example with the famous 4 chords. The first chord in the progression is the 1 chord, the tonic. When you're on the 1, everything sounds stable and grounded. It's like we're at home. We don't want to go anywhere. But of course the progression wouldn't have much of a sense of movement if we just stayed here on the 1, so the progression moves to 5, the dominant. The function of the dominant chord is to introduce tension and a sense of movement, because it wants to resolve back to the root. That's what 5 chords do, they want to resolve back to 1. If we did resolve back here to the tonic, going from 5 to 1, we'd have what's called a perfect cadence, a resolution from the dominant chord to the tonic chord. But to stretch out this progression, instead of resolving back to 1 now, we instead move to the 6 chord. Rather than being called a perfect cadence, this move from 5 to 6 is instead called a deceptive cadence, or an interrupted cadence. But of course we want our progression to keep moving forward, so we move to the 4 chord, the subdominant. The subdominant is like the more patient version of the dominant. Both the subdominant and the dominant want to resolve back to the tonic, to the 1. So that's what happens. When the chord progression repeats, the 4 resolves back to the 1. And this is what's called a plagal cadence, a move from the 4 chord, the subdominant, to the 1 chord, the tonic. So that's why the famous 4 chords work together. But what does that have to do with minor chords? Well, the thing that made this chord progression work so well, the thing that made it functional, is the cadences. We had this deceptive or interrupted cadence resolving us from 5 to 6, and we had a plagal cadence resolving us from the 4 at the end back around to the 1 at the start. And although our example didn't feature one, we could have also had the perfect cadence, a move from 5 to 1. These are by far the 3 most common cadences that you get in all of music, and there is one thing that almost all cadences feature: a major chord. So therefore, if you're writing a song that only uses minor chords, you can't really use any cadences. And because ultimately you need cadences to have functional harmony, that means that if you want to write a song that doesn't have anything but minor chords, the harmony's just going to sound quite static and one-dimensional. Some music though purposefully avoids using functional harmony. It doesn't want a sense of harmonic movement. Instead, the sense of movement and sense of development is going to come from different elements of the music. Funk music, for example, notoriously stays on 1 chord for minutes on end because the focus of the music isn't meant to be the harmony, it's meant to be the rhythm. In a similar way to funk music, rap music also often avoids chord progressions, instead using a sample or a loop, and these loops are often built from just 1 or 2 minor chords. Rap's harmonic simplicity is intentional, as to move the focus away from the harmony and onto the lyrics and the rhythm of the rapping.
Everything is fine when you listen to the D.O.G. I got the cultivating music that be captivating he who listens.
You're just one of the dark order. I'm beginning to feel like a rap god.
Another style where you can often find music based just on minor chords is modal jazz. Modal jazz is based on the principle of avoiding functional harmony. In the first half of the 20th century, jazz traditionally featured rich, highly functional chord progressions with clear cadences. But around the end of the 1950s, artists like Miles Davis, Bill Evans and John Coltrane began writing music which simply vamped on 1 or 2 chords for the entire song. These vamped chords weren't even really treated like chords, they were more treated like key centers, and the music's sense of development and expression would then come from exploring different modes and scales over those key centers. So What by Miles Davis is a great example of this. It spends almost 9 minutes vamping on D minor 7 and E flat minor 7. When we're on the D minor 7, it's effectively like we're in the key center of D, and that's it, there's no further chords. And likewise, when we move up to E flat minor 7, now E flat is the key center. Now, before I claim that So What only uses minor chords, I must mention that it has actually got a 30-second intro in which we get some different chords, including major chords. So strictly speaking, it's not an example of purely minor chords in a piece of music. It does come very close though, and there is actually another modal jazz piece by John Coltrane called Impressions, which is harmonically identical to So What, apart from it doesn't have that 30-second intro. So Impressions by John Coltrane does stick exclusively to minor chords. Ultimately, the reason why it's so hard to find songs that only use minor chords is because in practice, even just a brief use of a major chord can really enhance a song. For example, the Imperial March by John Williams comes very close to only using minor chords. These loosely related minor chords are actually one of the main elements that gives the Imperial March its disconcerting and unnerving sound. Here though, rather than the E flat minor that we've had so far, we briefly get an E flat major. To me, this brief bit of major gives the piece a sense of opening up. It makes it sound more epic and powerful. And considering that this theme is meant to represent Darth Vader, you could even go as far to say that this brief use of the major chord represents the small amount of good that is left in Darth Vader.
I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
So to find the examples in this episode, I did trawl through a lot of sheet music and a lot of chord websites, and even then I'm still fairly sure there's going to be plenty of examples that I missed of songs that only use minor chords. So if any examples jump to mind for you, do put them in the comments below, because I'd love to see what I missed. And as always, a massive thank you goes to all of my Patreons, including the names you see on screen right now, and Adam Granger, Andre Sainz Diaja, Andrew Brown, Andy Deacon, Austin Barrett, Bob McKinstry, Brittany Parker, Chris Cabell, Kieran Bennon, Daniel Long, Daryl, Darren Harvey, David Defundifer, Diego Giuliani, Elena Skorchenko, Esben Hansen, Eugene Leroy, Eyes, FD Hodor, George Taylor, Golfhouse, Guillermo Laytona, James Ko, J.A. Cockensparger, Joe Vasson, Jonas Soderstrom, Jonathan Banks, Justin Vigor, Meg Fellows, Melody Composer Squared, Nancy Gillard, Nicholas, Orlando Bernard, Paul Muller, Paul Pazel, Peter Dunphy, Roger Clay, Snitchelcraft, Steve Daly, Summer Ray, T. Newport, Tim Beaker, Toot, and Vladimir Kodakov.